All right, it's Ari Temkin and Nick. Don't call me Gelso, Gelso.
Come on, man. Why do you do that?
What? I don't. I think it'll stick. Don't call him Gelso, Gelso.
No, you know what it does? It instigates people to start calling me Gelso.
I'm sorry, buddy. I didn't mean to
You
do
just did
that.
it to the world, man. Now I got to deal with it. I've been dealing with my whole life. I answer to it at this point.
So, the NBA bubble, you have a situation that is very unique in NBA and sports history, obviously. And these guys have been in this bubble for such a long period of time. I mean, this is just a long time to be in the same place, cooped up. They do have access to golf courses and some nice amenities, but for the most part, it's a pretty bad, weird situation for a long period of time. So you're kind of at the end of this marathon. I mean, Nick, it's obviously going to change the landscape of the NBA and perhaps in the future too. But what do you think it's meant for the politics of it, the psyche of players? I mean, how much has that been a piece of this?
If you've been over to clnsmedia.com, you've been on our email blast, our social media, you see my opinions. I don't have a problem restating them here, Ari. It has changed. I mean, the world has changed in 2020. It is a wacky place. But if you look at any aspect that has been somewhat of a success, you'd look at the NBA bubble, both from the hockey standpoint and the NBA standpoint. No illnesses tested regularly, but the basketball has been phenomenal because
Right.
there's no distractions. But
And
there's
it's
also
neutralized.
it's
And it's
neutralized.
neutralized some of the home court advantage, travel. I mean, it's certainly kind of changed the dynamics that usually the dynamics of the playoffs too.
No distractions because they're all there. They're forced to bond, but at the
Right.
same time, Ari, as human psyche works, you're away from your family. You're in the same location for too long. All these restrictions, these guys are not used to any restrictions whatsoever. It has to play with the mind a bit. And we saw that, feeding back to the sports angle of it after game two of the Celtics Heat series when Marcus Smart kind of lost his nerve. And you've seen that also with Paul George. Hell, reactions to the president, which I think are probably have been warranted. He's been amping them up. It is just such an odd time, and I wonder what it means for the history of the sport and also the finances of the sport.
So you referenced Thursday night, Celtics lose game two of the Eastern Conference Finals, a series that many expect them to win. They're now down 2-0 to the Miami Heat, who have, from seemingly nowhere, I would say that, but Ben Steiner, who co-hosts the Court Vision podcast with Jameer Nelson on CLNS Media, he actually, when the playoffs started, said the Miami Heat will win the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, man, that was a
So
good prediction.
that's a crazy prediction that looks like it might be coming true. Marcus Smart, you mentioned the Athletic reporting on Wednesday that Smart stormed into the Celtics postgame locker room, saying that other players needed to be held accountable and not simply not simply pointing the finger toward him when things are going wrong. As Smart continued, and I'm reading directly from the Athletic report here, as Smart continued and his voice grew louder, sources said Brown snapped back and shouted that Celtics players must stay together and that their actions must come as a team, not individually, and that Smart needed to cool off. Those sources added Smart had verbal exchanges with a couple of the assistant coach during the game.
We get the drift. The point is,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, first of all, it's not nearly as bad as it sounded or ESPN made it sound last night.
Well, and this has
There's
happened it happens all the time. It's just not as widely reported and available in the history of the NBA.
correct. There's not that kind of. I mean, there's no access to the media in the bubble, even to
Right.
our media down in Florida. You're distanced, right? But there is not an enormous amount of media there. So you kind of do have access. It's a weird dichotomy, if that's the right word.
Right.
You look at Marcus Smart, I think these things, like you said, go on in sports all the time. You heard about, a lot of animosity and friction with the 2019 Celtics team with Kyrie Irving. But this team, it's uncharacteristic because they've been bonded very closely, have not had to deal with much adversity. However, like Cedric Maxwell said on his podcast, he believes Marcus is the glue guy. You have to deal with, it's almost like a KG type situation.
Yeah.
If you're going to have that kind of passion on a good note, you're going to have to deal with the downside of it too, which means the occasional outburst. And don't think for a minute it is not, compounded by the isolation of the bubble and some of that insanity. I don't know about you, Ari. I mean, we work together, I think you put out an email from our email blast back in the quarantine about trying to handle the quarantine as a sports columnist personality who now has no sports to follow.
Right.
I lost my mind. I think I have PTSD, and a lot of people do. A lot of people do in the world right now. You're looking at mental illness fallout from all that isolation. People will say these guys are wealthy; they have the world by the key. But the truth of the matter is, they kind of do have the world, and they don't have to conform much to anyone. And here they're in a very, very regimented, restricted environment.
Without their family, totally. I mean, it's
the families are there now. I mean, if it's me, my family ain't coming. Like, I don't want them around any of that because God knows. But the players, I can't blame them. And the families being there has helped them, I'm sure. It hasn't helped the Celtics at all. But I don't think it's hurt them, But it's just an odd time. I don't think sports will ever look the same. I don't think the world will ever look the same. I think some of the changes I wrote about on CLNSmedia.com is that you're probably never going to see a road broadcast again, at least from the radio angle. Play-by-play and color guys are not going to go on the road anymore for radio. I would highly doubt that. It's almost like remote work, right? Remote work is now the way to go. You save money. We see drawbacks. We've been doing remote work for 12 years, right? We know the drawbacks. Big companies are going to learn about them. But the fact is, it saves money. It saves on pollution. It saves on traffic. It saves on your focus on work, and people are more efficient. So in the sports world, that trickles down, I think, to the media. I don't believe that broadcast or teams, affiliates, are going to send broadcasters on the road anymore, just TV. I mean, how does that change the game? To me, it doesn't change anything. I don't know if you've listened to any radio broadcasts. They've been almost better because they have better camera angles, better TVs, better replays, whereas in today's NBA, the radio media or even the digital radio media are up in the halos of the arenas. They're not courtside anymore. And to sit in front of 3 monitors at home or in the studio and to be able to watch everything, replay on demand, you're going to give a better broadcast. And the piped-in sound of the bubble has been very good with the NBA. Very good.
What's interesting about that is I agree, and yet I think in football it's happening right now in the NFL. You don't have road. You have basically the road radio broadcasts are doing those broadcasts from the home stadium in an empty stadium, being able to watch the game film and then the all 22. But that is one I mean I think basketball. You're right. You're up higher. The court is smaller. Whereas in football, you need to see the whole field. So I think, there's a major difference there between the two sports and maybe how, broadcasting will change going forward potentially, especially in basketball.
The bubble has ripped down a perception that there is a major amount of access like there was years ago. Even as recent as 5 or 6 years ago, the radio analysts, the broadcasters went to dinner with the team. They played cards with the team. They were part of the team.
Right.
Today, it doesn't really go down like that.
Vince Lombardi used to have retreats before the season with media members that covered.
Red Auerbach had them at their camps, right? I mean, Dave Cowens is still best friends with Bob Ryan. Bob's on the network. Dave comes on often. So you see, that has changed. There's no more. I mean, even as recent as Kendrick Perkins and Cedric Maxwell, they were together on Max's show, and they are talking about back in the day playing cards on the bus in '08. That would never happen today. So there's not this access, and the bubble has ripped down that perception that, I mean, did you know that in radio broadcasts in normal times, you have the post-game interview and the player is not sitting alongside the broadcasters? Did you know the player is back in the locker room via satellite in the arena getting piped into It's crazy. So why
Yeah.
spend the money if you're broadcast media? What if you're a radio station? Why are you going to spend $1 million a year plus insurance and everything else to send two guys to the game to do an inferior product on the road when they could do it right here at Boston Garden, much better, sound better, and then home games they're here.
If you like what you're listening to, subscribe to our mailing list. Go to clnsmedia.com. For Nick Gelso, I'm Ari Temkin.